And the only reason my face is on TV right now is because I have had to constantly battle false claims. I always say two things can be true, right? I can love my dad.
When news first broke that Hulk Hogan had passed away, the world refused to believe it. The man who once defined strength, charisma, and invincibility? Gone? It didn't make sense. To millions, Hogan wasn't just a wrestler. He was a living myth, a titan in red and yellow who taught generations to say their prayers and eat their vitamins. But as the headlines spread across every platform and tributes began to pour in, disbelief slowly turned into heartbreak. Within hours, what began as a rumor became reality. Terry Bollea, better known as Hulk Hogan, had died at his home in Clearwater, Florida. According to official reports, it was early evening when the 911 call came in. The dispatcher described the caller's voice as composed but strained, the kind of tone that sits between panic and denial. The man on the line was Hogan's personal assistant, who explained that he'd found his employer unresponsive in his private gym. Paramedics were immediately dispatched to the mansion, a massive waterfront property with tall white pillars, a long palm-lined driveway, and the kind of quiet that made the ocean sound closer than it really was. When first responders arrived, they moved quickly but respectfully. Hogan was discovered near the weight bench, surrounded by the familiar space that had become almost sacred to him, framed posters from his wrestling days, mirrors reflecting decades of discipline, and neatly arranged dumbbells that hadn't been touched in hours. There was no chaos, no disarray, just a silence that felt heavy and final. His assistant had tried to wake him for dinner earlier but found no response. Despite every effort, CPR, oxygen, repeated checks, the outcome didn't change. Terry Bollea was gone. The medical examiner later confirmed what many suspected. Hogan had suffered cardiac arrest. For a man who had spent decades pushing his body past every conceivable limit, the diagnosis was both tragic and unsurprising. Years of surgeries, painkillers, travel, and training had taken their toll. Still, fans couldn't process it. Hulk Hogan was supposed to be eternal, too big, too loud, too legendary to simply fade away in silence. Police arrived soon after to secure the scene. They followed every procedure by the book: photographs, notes, detailed observations. The mansion was treated as both a home and a potential evidence site. Officers took stock of everything in sight: his workout equipment, medications, documents on his desk, even the half-finished protein shake sitting beside the treadmill. Yet nothing appeared out of place. There were no signs of foul play or forced entry, no suspicious injuries, no evidence of anything sinister. By the following morning, local news outlets had confirmed the death officially. Within hours, tributes flooded social media. Wrestling legends, fans, and even those who had once feuded with him shared memories and clips from his career. "He made us believe in heroes," one fan wrote. Another said simply, "Goodbye, brother," echoing Hogan's own iconic catchphrase. It seemed like the end of an era, until whispers began to spread about what really happened that night in Clearwater. Reporters near the scene noticed something strange. Federal agents arriving at the property just after the local authorities had cleared it. Neighbors described unmarked vehicles, plainclothes officers, and a brief but serious exchange at the gate before the agents were let inside. The sight of the FBI entering Hogan's mansion less than 24 hours after his death sent shockwaves across the internet. Theories exploded, everything from tax issues and undisclosed lawsuits to hidden files and unreleased footage. Nobody knew the truth, but everyone wanted to. At first, authorities declined to comment. The Clearwater Police Department released a short statement confirming that the death was non-criminal in nature and that all findings pointed toward natural causes. But they didn't address the presence of federal agents, and that silence only made the rumors worse. Fans online started connecting dots that didn't exist, digging up old interviews and speculating that Hogan had been under investigation for something big. Some even claimed there was a secret vault in his home, while others said the FBI was retrieving classified communications. Inside the mansion, however, the truth was far less sensational, though still intriguing. The house was personal, more modest than people expected from a man of Hogan's fame. It wasn't the exaggerated palace described by tabloids years earlier. Instead, it felt lived in. Framed photos of Brooke and Nick on the walls, family souvenirs from the 1980s, and championship belts displayed like museum pieces. His study had a stack of magazines, a coffee mug, and a folded newspaper left open to the sports section. Everything pointed to a man who'd settled into a quieter, more reflective life. When Brooke Hogan arrived the next morning, she didn't speak to the cameras outside. Witnesses recalled her walking past reporters with a blank expression, tears barely held back. She wasn't ready to speak, not to the press, not to anyone. Family friends later revealed that she'd spoken to her father just 2 days earlier. He sounded good, she told them. He said he'd been doing better, going to the gym again, eating clean, getting more rest. Nothing in their conversation hinted that the end was near. The following week, the autopsy results confirmed the story. No drugs, no foul play, no trauma. His death was natural. Still, the chatter online refused to die down. What were the FBI agents really doing in Hulk Hogan's mansion? Why did they spend hours inside his private office? Were they protecting something or taking it away? Brooke remained silent during those first few weeks, honoring her father privately. But inside, she was struggling not only with grief, but with the growing circus surrounding his name. When she finally decided to speak, she would reveal a truth that no one, not even his most loyal fans, could have imagined. It took nearly 3 weeks before Brooke Hogan decided to speak publicly. During that time, she avoided all interviews, skipped public appearances, and stayed away from social media altogether. To many, it seemed like silence born of grief. But behind that quiet, she was preparing herself. She wanted to make sure that when she did speak, it would be truthful, measured, and free of the noise that had taken over the internet. When she finally broke her silence, it wasn't through a major network or a glossy magazine exclusive. Instead, she sat down with a small local television station in Clearwater, the same city where her father had built his home and ultimately spent his final moments. The interview began softly. The host, clearly nervous to broach such an emotional topic, asked Brooke what she most wanted people to know about her father. She paused for a long time before answering. "He was at peace," she said. "That's the part people don't understand. He wasn't angry, he wasn't bitter, he wasn't hiding anything. He was tired, but he was content." Her words immediately silenced weeks of speculation. For the first time, someone close to Hogan was speaking not as a celebrity or a spokesperson, but as a daughter. She then addressed the question that everyone had been asking, the one headline that refused to fade. Why had the FBI shown up at Hulk Hogan's mansion after his death? "There was no investigation," she said firmly. "No crime. They were there for something completely different." Brooke explained that in the months leading up to her father's death, he had been dealing with a frustrating and increasingly dangerous problem: online impersonation. Strangers had been using his name, his image, and even his voice, thanks to new artificial intelligence software, to scam fans and small businesses. Fake charities, phony meet-and-greet offers, counterfeit memorabilia, all of it circulated using Hogan's likeness. Some victims even received phone calls that sounded eerily like the real Hulk Hogan, complete with his signature gravelly tone and catchphrases. "Dad hated that," Brooke said. "He was always so protective of his fans. It really bothered him that people were being tricked because they trusted his name." According to her, Hogan had contacted federal authorities months earlier, after discovering how widespread the impersonation had become. He'd already been in touch with agents who specialized in digital fraud and identity theft, hoping they could help him protect his brand and his fans. His home office contained not only his personal records, but also a large amount of digital security equipment, servers, encrypted drives, and data collected over the years from online investigations he'd started himself. He was careful, Brooke added. He wasn't paranoid, but he took his privacy seriously. After everything he went through in the public eye, he didn't want his life to be anyone else's story again. That, she explained, was why the FBI had returned to the mansion after his death, not to investigate him, but to secure what he had been protecting. They needed to make sure that his digital records, passwords, and private servers were safely removed before anyone else could access them. There was nothing illegal, she emphasized. They were helping us keep his name safe. That's all it was. The host asked her about the rumors of a sealed box or mystery safe the agents had taken from his office. Brooke smiled sadly. There was a box, yes, but it wasn't anything mysterious. It was just personal. Old contracts, letters, some family photos. Dad kept everything, and he was sentimental like that. He had letters from fans dating back to the 80s, notes from matches, even napkins with autographs. The agents just wanted to make sure none of that ended up in the wrong hands. Brooke went on to share what her father's last few weeks had really been like, far removed from the chaos that now surrounded his name. He'd slowed down, she said softly. He wasn't traveling much anymore. He wanted to enjoy the simple things. He'd wake up early, make coffee, maybe do a light workout, and then just sit outside. He'd call me sometimes and talk about the sunrise over the bay. He said it made him feel small, but in a good way. Their conversations had become more frequent in recent years. For a long time, their relationship had been strained. The family's reality show had exposed them to harsh public scrutiny, and fame had driven wedges between them. But time and maturity had healed much of that. When I was younger, I saw him as this superhero who never failed, Brooke admitted. As I got older, I realized he was just a man, a dad who made mistakes, who wanted to make things right. That made me love him even more. She recalled one of their last phone calls vividly. He told me, "You're doing good, Brooke. You've found your lane. Don't let the noise get to you." He always said that. The noise. He meant gossip, drama, people trying to pull you off your path. He'd had so much of that in his own life that he wanted me to stay grounded. That was the last real conversation we had. When the topic of his death came up, Brooke's composure faltered slightly. Her voice trembled, but she continued. "He didn't suffer," she said. "That's what gives me peace. He was doing what he loved, in the place he loved, surrounded by things that made him happy." She described visiting the house after his passing. The air still carried the faint smell of his cologne, and the gym was just as he'd left it, neat, organized, with his favorite dumbbells lined up in perfect order. "It felt frozen in time," she said, like he'd just stepped out for a minute. She found comfort in the small things. The newspaper folded on the kitchen table, the mug beside it with a bit of cold coffee at the bottom. "That was Dad," she said. "Predictable in his routines, even when life was unpredictable." As the interview continued, Brooke spoke about how much her father had changed in recent years. Fame no longer excited him. He didn't crave the spotlight or the roar of the crowd anymore. He used to tell me, "I've had my time out there. Now I just want peace." He'd grown more spiritual, more reflective, and more interested in the people around him than the fame that once defined him. "He'd talk about gratitude a lot," she said. That was his word, gratitude. He'd say, "No matter what, be grateful, even when things fall apart." In those moments, the image of Hulk Hogan, the boisterous, muscle-bound hero shouting into microphones, gave way to Terry Bollea, the man behind the legend. Brooke's memories painted a picture of quiet humanity. The public saw him as invincible, but in his final days, he'd been gentle, introspective, and, for the first time in decades, truly content. When the interview ended, Brooke thanked the host and walked out of the studio without fanfare. But her words had already spread across the world. For the first time, fans felt like they'd heard the real story, not from tabloids or rumors, but from the person who knew him best. The mystery surrounding the FBI's visit began to fade, replaced by something more powerful than speculation, understanding. What no one yet knew, however, was that among the items recovered from her father's office, Brooke had found something deeply personal, something she wasn't ready to share with the public just yet. That revelation would come later when she was ready, and when the world was willing to listen not to the myth of Hulk Hogan, but to the message Terry Bollea left behind. When Brooke Hogan finally chose to reveal what the FBI had discovered inside her father's office, she did it quietly. Not in an interview, not through a press release, but during a small charity event dedicated to children's wellness, one of her father's favorite causes. The reporters who attended hadn't expected her to mention anything personal, but as she stood before the crowd, speaking about her father's generosity and love for helping others, her voice shifted from strength to something softer. "There's one thing people don't know," she said. "Something the agents found that told me everything about who he really was." Brooke explained that, among the papers and keepsakes the FBI had collected for safekeeping, one particular envelope had been sealed separately and returned to the family later. Inside were handwritten letters, not contracts, not notes for a book or a documentary, but messages to the people who mattered most to him. One was addressed to Brooke, another to her brother Nick, and a third simply labeled, "To my fans." Each was written in Hogan's unmistakable handwriting, firm, all capital letters, as if he'd been signing an autograph. The letter to Brooke was short and simple. "I'm proud of you," it began. "You've stayed true to yourself. Don't let the noise drown your voice. Keep your heart open, even when it hurts." She paused when reading that line, admitting it took her days before she could finish the rest. "He didn't talk about fame or money," she said. "He talked about kindness, about peace, about forgiving the past." The letter to his son Nick carried a similar message, filled with fatherly advice about strength, mistakes, and second chances. "We all fall," he wrote, "but the real fight is getting back up again." And in the letter to his fans, the people who had followed him through triumphs and scandals alike, Hogan had left what Brooke called his final promo. It wasn't boastful, it wasn't loud. It was humble. "You made me feel bigger than I was," he wrote. "But I hope I gave you something real too, a reason to smile, a reason to keep going when life pins you down. Remember that heroes aren't perfect. They're just people who keep fighting." Brooke said the FBI agents had no idea what they'd uncovered when they found the letters. To them, it was just more paperwork to catalog. But to her, it was the closure she hadn't known she needed. It made sense, she said. He'd always been preparing for this. Not in a morbid way, but in a peaceful one. He wanted to leave words that would outlive him. As she finished her speech, the room was silent. No one was thinking about rumors or investigations anymore. The story had come full circle, from speculation and mystery to something profoundly human. In the end, there was no secret scandal, no hidden truth. What the FBI found in Hulk Hogan's mansion wasn't evidence of wrongdoing. It was proof of love, reflection, and legacy. For the world, Hulk Hogan will always be the immortal icon who ruled the wrestling ring. But for Brooke, he will forever be Terry Bollea, her dad, her hero, and the man who taught her that strength isn't measured in how loudly you fight, but in how quietly you love.